Yours, on the other hand, appear quite natural. God-given, am I right?
What the hell is wrong with you?
I don't know.
Watching Parks and Recreation and seeing how everyone made fun of Jerry or Larry, I remember that in the earlier seasons, he was more genuine, but then he became repetitive. So I asked myself, how can you create a loser character that lasts for so long? After thinking for a bit, I found my answer. Alan Harper. Alan, played by Jon Cryer, was a loser, often despicable, and though it may not seem like it, few people could afford to live as losers for so long and still get paid. However, Jon didn't just do it with Alan. In fact, since the 80s, he has been playing this kind of loser character and has achieved fame with them, both with audiences and awards. But how did Cryer manage to do this for so long? How was he able to turn loser characters into Emmy winners? In this video, I'll try to answer those questions, although, spoiler for the last one, the answer has become a bit complicated. To do this, we need to start with his early roles in Hollywood. That's right, from the beginning, Jon was already establishing certain patterns. As I have mentioned in other videos, actors' early roles are often influenced by their appearances. And the 19-year-old Jon didn't exactly have Steven Seagal's flawless face, so most of his roles from the start revolved around somewhat innocent teenagers. In 1984, he starred in his first movie, No Small Affair. Interestingly, the movie poster mentions something that would be suspiciously controversial today. But hey, it was the 80s. The Rock was 40 years old in high school. Bill Cosby had a hugely popular show, and Hairspray was running out thanks to Robert Downey Jr. So several crazy things could be accepted. Cryer played Charles, a teenager fascinated by photography, who meets a singer named Laura, played by Demi Moore. Yep, the same one from The Substance, but here without the need for the substance. Charles is totally absorbed in his own world, not very popular at school, but not a fool either. This kind of character could be considered the geeky loser, not exactly a nerd, but a pretty isolated and friendless teen. As the movie progresses, Charles becomes obsessed with Laura, doing foolish things like spending all his savings to promote Laura on the city's taxis. But instead of attracting people who want to hear her sing, let's just say they contact her for other services.
I'm talking downtown!
In the end, Laura leaves town, but at least Charles gets his reward. An interesting fact about Jon and Demi Moore is that they were actually in a relationship, though, like in the movie, Jon ended up alone in the end.
Before Pretty in Pink, you kind of fell in love with her.
Yeah.
And you guys got it on. And,
Yeah.
and
This film didn't do particularly well at the box office, but it was Cryer's first taste of the big screen, and perhaps of other things as well.
I'm talking downtown!
The next one would be perhaps his most popular movie character, Ducky. In 1986, John Hughes had already had successes with 16 Candles and The Breakfast Club, and he wanted to replicate another hit with Pretty in Pink. The story revolves around Andy, played by Molly Ringwald, and a teenager Ducky, played by Jon, who is in love with but can confess his feelings to. This character is quite peculiar. At times he is very confident, expressing himself with style and dancing epically, but outside of that, he doesn't seem to be popular at school, and in fact he's the complete opposite of the characters like Blaine or Steph, who are the popular ones. I think we could also categorize him as a loser. Step by step, Cryer was getting closer to Alan's life drainer. Despite this, from my point of view, the character has almost transcended Andy. Ducky is seen as the outcast who, no matter how he's viewed or treated, stays true to his style, which makes him very authentic. And sure, we can criticize, as many already have, his childish behavior throughout many parts of the movie, but in the end I think he redeems himself. Even in those silly things he does, I believe people at that age can relate. After all, I think we've all acted a bit dumb when we were teenagers. Well, unless you were The Rock, in which case you were already 4 in your teens. This movie was actually a great success and is still considered a cult classic today. And not gonna lie, Cryer's performance remains one of the most memorable aspects. Incredibly, Jon wasn't the first choice, just like I never was when they picked teams in sports. Initially, Anthony Michael Hall was considered for the role, and Ringwald even suggested Robert Downey Jr. But since the movie ending was changed and Andy doesn't end up with Ducky, Jon seemed like a more fitting choice for Molly. Cryer spoke about this years later, saying, "Molly dropped me the bomb that she would have been fine with the original ending if Robert Downey Jr. had played Ducky. But since it was me, she just couldn't see it. It was like, Wow, so I'm that unattractive? I'm that much of a loser? Why don't you just go with Robert and all the guys from the 80s movies you've done and stop acting like a diva you insult? Okay, I made up that last sentence, but you get the idea. So as you can see, not only were the characters Cryer played not considered very popular, but apparently he wasn't either. Although to be honest, the context of all this tied to the Brat Pack, a group of young actors that in the 80s starred in several movies together like Andrew McCarthy, Molly, Emilio Estevez, and Anthony Michael Hall. According to Jon, he wasn't part of the group because he wasn't considered cool enough. And as we've seen, Molly Ringwald didn't think much of him either. In fact, they were quite distant from Cryer. This could be another important factor in Cryer's roles as a teenager or young loser. Many of his real-life colleagues didn't consider him to be part of their popular group, which may have influenced his casting and limited him to certain types of roles. The following year, Jon would play Lenny Luthor. He was Lex Luthor's nephew in Superman 4. Although he was supposed to be a villain, I think he resembled the type of villains like Bulk and Skull from Power Rangers, rather than someone truly serious. For Cryer's bad or perhaps good fortune, the movie was a flop, and at least this role wouldn't be so memorable. In 1987, along with Superman, Jon kept trying to land roles that wouldn't be Jon holding as a loser. One such example is Hiding Out, where he plays a stockbroker who, in order to escape some trouble, pretends to be a high school student. Again, like no small affair, I don't think his romance with the student Ryan would fly today. But again, those were the 80s, and there were crazy people like those who thought Mac and Me was going to be a blockbuster, and that no one would notice it was just E.T. with a bunch of tumors on its face. Useless fact: Jennifer Aniston appeared as uncredited background extra in Mac and Me. In Hiding Out, he does step away from the full role. He's a bit more serious and cool, although, who knows, maybe still not cool enough for the Brat Pack, where you needed at least 2 rehab stints just to get in. The thing is, even though the film has gained popularity over the years, it didn't do well on the box office in the 80s, adding another flop to Cryer's record. But hey, there was still Morgan Stewart's coming home that year.
So I apologize to everyone for Morgan Stewart's coming home.
I don't think there's much to say about this role when even Cryer himself apologized for it. Cryer was somewhat emulating Ferris Bueller, and in the end, it was just another E.T. with tumors.
It's not a tumor.
Maybe due to these failed experiments, Cryer returned to his roles as a clumsy character, like in Hot Shots, and as if it were fate, the movie was a success. I think while Cryer's successes in the 80s are indeed correlated with his loser roles, I honestly believe the real factor was the movies themselves. Essentially, Cryer had the bad luck of choosing bad movies, or at least not very outstanding ones, for his more serious roles. But that doesn't mean his acting was bad. Now in the 90s, Cryer tried his luck on television with worse results, to the point where he was labeled a show killer. Every series he was in failed.
After the show killer thing, I joke about it now, but at the time it was a real issue for me in the industry. There was not a lot of people that wanted to hire me for a while.
But in 2003 came his greatest loser role, Alan Harper. From teenage loser, he transitioned to adult loser. Alan from 2.5 Men is an erotic, insecure, financially unfortunate person, and sometimes a priest, which stands in stark contrast to his brother Charlie, who is relaxed, wealthy, successful with women, and has surely been through at least 2 stints in rehab. If it weren't for some of Alan's successes in a few episodes, I think he would be on the same level of a loser as Jerry from Rick and Morty. Few characters as pusillanimous and laughable as Alan have been seen on television for so long besides Stephen A, and Jon and ESPN are largely responsible for this. And it's not wonder he won 2 Emmys for portraying Alan. His importance is so significant that, in my opinion, after Charlie left the show, Alan was the only one who somehow kept the show going. In recent years, I have to acknowledge that Jon Cryer made a decision that changed his trajectory, and it wasn't cold showers, yoga, or reading 1 book per week. Like some type of redemption for his character in Superman 4, he would play Lex Luthor in Supergirl. Personally, I don't think his performance was the best, but for the weight of the character that is Lex Luthor, I do think he did a good job, which was surprising to me given that my references for Cryer were Alan and Ducky. I think it was fair, though, to have doubts about Cryer as Lex Luthor, but despite this last case, I believe Jon Cryer managed to make several characters who could be considered losers famous in a way that not many actors could. Clearly, Cryer's physical appearance and personality were factors, and not being a member of the Brat Pack confirmed this in the 80s, when he wasn't accepted into that group. Later, he also made poor decisions when trying to take on more serious roles and break out of his mold. We only a few like Lex Luthor working out. So the lesson of the day is never try to change if you feel like a loser. Just shave your head and become a billionaire and have an IQ of 250 and everything is gonna be alright. But of course, none of this would matter if he didn't know how to act. In his roles as Ducky and Alan, Cryer was able to represent two types of losers very well, and both worked. In the first role, he made people relate to him and stand out more than other characters in the same movie. And in the second one, he held up a show for nearly 12 seasons, being hilarious and despicable at the same time, which I think is quite a difficult feat.